Right. Before that, though, Satan couldn't get at Job at all. So, and it was this hedge that protected him. Now, what Job will say at the end is the very hedge that protected him was his prison. The very blessing of God became a prison. Before you get holier than thou, all of us have been there. Where we look at God pulls something back from our life and it's a blessing. I want you to think right now, does God allow trials in our lives to help us? How often do we look at them as cursings and we plead God to take it away when it might be the biggest blessing that you could have ever had? And so what do we look at it? It's no longer his protection. Nope, it's my prison house. And we'll come back to that. So be aware when you're looking at this, perception changes, especially when you don't understand what God's doing. And we know Job didn't understand that. We know his three friends there did not understand. And so the perception changed and really went downhill. He says, think about this. He lost all of his kids. He said, I would rather not have known what it was like to have kids than to actually have them and lose them. So all the blessings that he had with his kids wiped out. Now please be careful about judging Job. The pain, the suffering, what he's going through is so burdened on his life. This is literally, mark this, how he feels. Keep that in mind. How he feels and how we feel doesn't always equal truth. Remember that. And we're going to see this as we go through all of these things. In verses 4 through 7, notice, he wanted his birthday to be remembered no more. And he wished that he'd been obliterated from the calendar. Look at what he says, verses 4 through 7. He says, let that day be darkness. Let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. In other words, annihilate that day. Verse 6. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined unto the days of the year. You know what that is? That's a calendar. Take, what's your birthday? And have it wiped out so that day. So mine's August 10th. So go from August 7th, 8th, 9th, 11th, 12th, 13th. Just wipe that day out. That's what he's getting at. He said, let it not be joined to the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of months. Lo, let that night be solitary. Let no joyful voice come therein. You say, man, that guy's way down. Oh, yeah. You and I would be down too, facing what he faced. And so Job says, look at verse 8. He says, who are ready to raise up their mourning. He says, let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning. Modern versions will call that Leviathan, who are ready to raise up Leviathan. It's again, it's not Leviathan, although the word is connected even in the book of Job with raising up Leviathan. In other words, there were individuals that knew how to stir up that serpent, that being. But again, when you look at this, he's talking about those who were professional mourners. Did Jesus ever bring up professional mourners? Remember those? We have mourned for you, we have piped for you, and you have not lamented, you have not cried or wept. Who were they? Well, we don't have anyone like this. We might need them, though. The next time someone dies, we want someone to come in the church, a group of them, and to wail, and to sing, and to cry aloud. And no, but that was that society and culture. One commentator said this, there were those who were brimful of sorrow, and always ready to pour out their cries and tears and complaints, and with them curses, as men in great passions frequently do. So such mourning men or mourning women, whose common employment it was, and who were hired to mourn, and therefore were always ready to do upon funeral occasions, And I'll give you a list of verses where this is brought up. 2 Chronicles 35:25, Jeremiah 9:17, 18, 20, Ezekiel 30, verse 2, Joel 1:15, Amos 5:16, Matthew 9:23 talks about, we have piped for you, we have mourned for you. So there were professional mourners. You say, that is weird. Yeah, but we're not in that culture and society. And so he says, when they're rising up, he said, let them rise up for me, even though I'm not dead. They need to mourn over my day. They need to mourn over my birth. I would say, man, that's pretty bad to get that deep, to get that kind of despair and that kind of terrification. I would call it terror, as he puts it. And then notice in verses 11 through 19, Job moves from the matter of wanting to never be born and moves to the desire to have been stillborn. He wanted to die before he came out of the womb. Notice what he says, verse 11. He says, why died I not from the womb? What do we call that? Stillborn. He said, why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Why did the knees prevent me? Let me ask you, what does that mean? What does it mean for the knees to prevent me? Think of his mother. That to stop the child from being born and basically kill the baby as it was coming out. I mean, that's vicious language, is it not? Yeah, which they couldn't do, but she would have killed the baby as it was coming out. He says, or why the breast that I should suck? In other words, that I wouldn't even have that opportunity. For now should I have laid still and been quiet. I should have slept. Well, you said, that's pretty good. No. He's talking about dying as a baby. He says, then had I been at rest, I would have never known these things. With kings and counselors of the earth, which built desolate places for themselves, or with princes that had gold, who filled their houses with silver, or as an hidden untimely birth, I had not been, as infants which never saw light. What is he talking about there? Those that died at birth or were not even conceived. They were never even conceived. There the wicked cease from troubling. In other words, when you're dead, if you had never been born, you never face trouble. He said, and there the weary be at rest. When you die, there's rest. So again, had I not had that, had I not been born, I would have been in those places where they are. He says in verse 18, there the prisoners rest together. They hear not the voice of the oppressor. Again, what's he saying? We're in that place where we're all not alive and we don't have to deal with any of the junk that's here. How many suicidal people thought that? Okay? How many people thought this when they went through the loss of a child or a loss of loved ones and reached that state of depression? How many people that have been sick have felt what Job is feeling here and have gone through it? He said, verse 19, the small and great are there. Makes no difference. Death is the common factor. And the servant is free from his master. And I think you all understand that. I don't think you need a Hebrew interpretation on that. We come to verses 20 through 23, and notice Job moves to a desire for the light of life to be extinguished in death. Verse 20, wherefore is light given to him that is in misery? Now what is that? That's the life of light, the light of life. Yes. Kings and counselors go to the grave. And they're at peace. They're dead. They've built palaces and places in desolate places and made them flourish. But they still died, and they're better off than me. Verse 15, or with princes that had gold, who filled their houses with silver. So in other words, they built in desolate places and built up, but died and went to rest. And these that had gold and silver died and went to rest. He says, in me, I'm alive and suffering. So that's the implication behind verses 14 and 15. Yeah, but he's not even looking at their uselessness. He said it's the how do I say this? The common comfort of them all is that they're all going to die. Now, question, is that true? Is that a common comfort, those of us who know Jesus Christ as Savior? All right, what about those who don't? Is that a comfort to realize they're going to burn in hell for all of eternity in the lake of fire? That's not a comfort. But for Job, well, it's the common ground where they go and rest. Now remember, in a lot of ways, there's false perception that will go on also because we're looking at things with our eyes. And Job is looking at things with his eyes and with his feelings. Now his faith is going to override all of it. And I'm thankful that God works and does what he does in this. And so notice in verses 20 through 23, he says, wherefore, pause before we go any further. Any other questions on any more verses in Job 3? How many of you would say Job is in a pretty bad state? All right, good, we're on the same page. He says there, wherefore in light is light given to him that is in misery, and he's this kind of misery. And life unto the bitter in soul. How would you categorize emotionally and mentally a bitter in soul? That's the core of his being. That's down to the depths of who he is. What does it mean to be bitter in soul?
So frustrated that he couldn't change the situation, he couldn't protect the family from what seems to be a tornado. He's so frustrated. I couldn't do a thing to save myself and my life and my family.
Think, did he walk with God? Did he do everything to go forward for God, to help his family with God? And this is the result. Question, did any other believers ever face this? Read Psalm 73. Don't read it right now, but go there. Asaph said that. Same, very similar to what Job said. So yes, frustrated inside that this is not matching.
Job would be more than resentful.
Possibly at this point. But he still doesn't sin against God because he'll come out and say, I believe in chapter 13, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. So I don't know how much of this is filtering over to God as it is where his situation and what he's going through. Oh, he's venting, that is for sure. So misery would definitely be part of the bitterness. And if you look up all the adjectives he uses about his situation through chapter 3, you get an understanding of what bitterness, bitter in soul, is talking about. Notice verse 21. Which long for death. What does that mean? I want to die. Does it well, it might be a good thing if I die. Oh no. He's yearning for it. Can I say this here? Why doesn't Job kill himself? Exactly. His faith in God. There was something that disconnected Job because he could have, could he not? Exactly. Even in the most depth of despair where he's talking and revealing these things, he never considers killing himself. Which is a fascinating thing from my perspective because there are many that are in far less of a situation that break and take their life. But again, we don't know the mental state of individuals, but what kept him from doing that was literally his faith in God, even though he had no clue what God was doing. He had no clue of what was going on. He didn't go to that. If he did, he quickly dismissed the thought. He says, but it cometh not. I'm longing for it, but it's not coming. It's not here. And dig for it more than for hid treasures. I'm digging for the word of God and for the character of God through the scriptures. When was the last time you said, I'm digging for death, man? I want it more than I want gold and silver. I said, man, that's pretty bad to get to that point. Verse 22. which rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave. Verse 23. Why is light given to a man whose way is hid? What does that mean, whose way is hid? I have no clue what's going on. Things are blocking my way. I can't see beyond what's in front of me right now. So it's even hard for him to look and consider hope. For him right now, death is hope. And that's what he's wishing for. He says at the end, and whom God hath hedged in. And hedged in is there's that prison. The very blessing and protection of God becomes his prison house. And that's a tough thing, but I will say this, there are many believers who think that way. I preached a message many years ago called Loving Leashes. God puts us on leashes. And the only way I could describe it was, any of you ever see Tom and Jerry? Any of you remember the cartoon Tom and Jerry? Do you remember the big bulldog that was in there? How many of you remember the cartoon where Tom is going after Jerry and he gets into that dog and he realizes how long the leash is for the dog? And then he draws a line and he runs up to there, and that dog's with the stretch leash, and he grabs his hand and goes whack and slaps that dog across. Well, the dog finally figures out, change where the line is. So he does, and Tom comes in and try to whack him, and the dog jumps right onto him. And he goes, hi there, buddy. But what is God doing with us? He's holding us back from destruction, from hurt, from damage that will destroy your soul, that will annihilate a lot of other things, from taking you down. And a lot of times those loving leashes, or as Job puts it here, hedges, we look at prisons. And we act like spoiled brats and we cry, why won't God? Why God? Why God? When you don't understand that these are the blessings and protection of God, not to hold you back from something good, but from destruction. And so Job is complaining even over this hedge that God has in his life. And it's interesting that he knew about the hedge, that Job understood that what God had put around him and blessed him with. And again, that makes sense the more you think about it. And so notice in verse 24, Job uses the phrases roarings and sighing and roaring. Look at verse 24. He says, for my sighing cometh before I eat, and my roarings are poured out like waters. Do you know what that tells you? In this situation, Job lost his appetite. He couldn't eat anymore. So what I would like for you to do at some point is to start documenting what physical descriptions do you see Job giving on his condition. So we know he had bad breath. We know boils on his skin to where they itched and burned. We know here that he lost his appetite. We read before that he had a fever. And so these physical things, what this does is it lets you get a more fuller picture of the condition that Job was in. And we'll get this as we go along. But a lot of times we just think, oh, he had boils. Oh, no, there were a lot of things that came with it. And so I want you to be looking and considering those things as we go through this. Notice in verses through 20 through 26, 25 through 26, in the next two verses, that Job states that the thing which I greatly feared. Notice, he says, for the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me. What does that tell you?
A lot of times our security comes from what we have. Is my house good enough? Is my car good enough?
And in the back of his mind, he always had this fear. Which brings out why Job did chapter 1, verse 5. Go there. Look at what it says. This connects to that, Job's thinking. Everyone got Job 1, verse 5? And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, and what's in his mind? Just maybe. That was really a fear of Job's. that somewhere in his family, in his own life, there would be this sin against God that he had missed. Go back to chapter 3 again. He says, "For the thing that I greatly feared is come upon me." Has that ever happened to any of you? The thing you feared the most actually hit you and came into your life. That's a scary situation, but there it was for Job. He says, "And that which I was afraid of is come unto me." And notice the next phrase in verse 26. "I was not in" what? "Neither had I, neither was I, yet trouble came." In other words, there's two perspectives that come out with these phrases. One, he was crying out to God, and he was trying to do everything, yet trouble came. The other aspect to this, and it's just as true, is that at this point, Job has a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear. And that fear and anxiety are compounded and are building. And the indication in verse 26 is that Job is expecting more trouble, that it's not over yet. Well, is he right? Which way is the trouble now going to come even more? What's the second word in chapter 4, verse 1? Eliphaz is going to show up now. Now, Eliphaz is the most kind of the three. Wait till you get to one of them, man. He just lays into Job, and he tells him, "You're a wicked man." And he says, "You know you're in sin. Let's drive some salt into that wound. And let's not be kind about it. Let's just dive you into the ground, and then when you're down, we're not going to kick you. We're going to stomp on your face." That's literally what these guys will do. But Eliphaz starts off nicely. But remember, who initiated the conversations? Who started in chapter 3? Job did. So now Eliphaz is going to respond to him. Because I don't want to say Job had the woe is me mentality. Have any of you ever met anybody with the woe is me mentality? Does it ever get on your nerves? So be careful about judging these three, because we get in the same emotional and mindset. Any of you ever feel, again, I'm sorry, I'm just being brutally honest with you. Would you just please shut up? Oh, good, so I'm not alone. But you're so gracious that you wouldn't say that to me, because I know that's what you're talking about. Anyways, let's move on to verse number 1 of chapter 4. So we find Eliphaz of the three friends, his first speech. We saw where he was from, Teman. He's the Temanite. And he answered and said, and you'll notice in verses 2 through 6, Eliphaz began kindly. Very kind man. And he acknowledges that Job was recognized as a wise man. Unfortunately, with the opening of all their mouths, Bildad and Abihu and those guys, it's going to say, yeah, they're not so wise. It also is revealed, how did they come to their determinations on right and wrong? Really, their view and their perspective of God and their view of how they're going to live life. Where did they get all that from? Because they definitely had some insights, and I see a lot of people think like one of these. And even believers have that perception. And again, Eliphaz got his, I would say this, and I would like to go here, because this is really where he gets his knowledge and understanding. Look at verse 12. Here's how he determined his view of God and truth and how Job's situation was. Now a thing was secretly brought to me, and mine ear received a little thereof. Does anybody know what he's talking about, a little thereof? That's a whisper. What happened? I heard it. I heard a voice speak to me. And he says, if you look in verse 12 again, he says, it was brought to me. What was brought to you? Notice in verse 13. In thoughts from what? Visions of the night. When deep sleep falleth on men, Fear came upon me and trembling, which made all my bones shake. Then what happened? Verse 15. Passed before my face. What happened to him? He got goosebumps. Ooh. And then verse 16. It stood still, but I could not discern the form thereof. An image was before mine eyes. There was silence, and I heard a voice saying.
There really are monsters under your bed.
Here's how he determined view of God, the truth about Job, was by experience. Through human experiences or through mystical experiences. Are people determining truth today by mystical experiences? By visions and by people hearing voices? Yeah, they are. What has God given us to filter everything? His Word. But again, Eliphaz did not determine things by this. This is how he determined truth. This is how he determined his view of God. This is how he determined whether someone was right with God or wrong with God. I perceive that thou art wrong with God. Why? Because I was revealed by the Spirit of God in me. I saw your inner workings. I know your heart. I know your mind. How? Because God gave it to me. You've got to be careful with that. That could be acid reflux. You don't know where those spirits are coming from. Remember, there is a Holy Spirit, and then there are many evil spirits that have gone out into the world. There is another Jesus out there that these demons and these spirits give. Remember, there's the spirit of infirmity. There's different spirits talked about in the Gospels. How do you know whether they're of God or not? What does the Bible say in 1 John 4? Try the spirits whether they be of God. And so, this is not the way you determine truth. Well, because I feel it. I perceive it. I've got an extrasensory perception. I know. No. Be careful. But that's the way Eliphaz determined it. And that's a dangerous place to be. And so, let's read verses 2 through 6. He says, if we essay to commune with thee. What does he mean, essay? Agree to venture that we're going to try to be with you and be here with you. He said, wilt thou be grieved? And that's a good question. Are you okay that we're here and we're about to talk? Shouldn't you ask that for someone that just said chapter 3? All right, good. I would say that. I think that's why. Are you okay if we're here with you? Yeah. And he may have said, yeah, but don't talk, please. But he didn't say that. He says, but who can withhold himself from speaking? Now, do you understand that? After all we've heard you just say, literally, do you think we can't say anything to you? Because what they heard from Job is, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me. The depression, the discouragement, the defeat. And for several of these guys, they got frustrated over it. That Job, and the more Job talks, the more they're seeing it like this. You know, you're just trying to justify yourself. None of this would happen if you were right with God. If you were right with God, this would not take place. Why? Because God blesses His children and doesn't curse them. So again, wrong summation. Wrong. How did he come to that? Because of what he got in chapter 4, verse 12 down through 16. Continue reading with me. Behold, thou hast instructed many. So he's acknowledging Job's character, Job's position, what Job has done. And he said, you're a teacher. You teach right things and good things, notice. And thou hast strengthened the weak hands. Tell me what that means. What does it mean to strengthen weak hands? Held them up. Also, this would carry the idea of encouraged. He came alongside people. So I would say he was one who edified and built up people. I'm looking and saying, this is what they're acknowledging of him. This is what we know of you, Job. So this goes back to the fact, yeah, brother, They were familiar with who Job was. They knew who he was, what he was like. Verse 4. The words have upholden him that was falling. So in other words, your words, what does it mean to uphold? Encourage, strengthen. Who are those that are falling? What does it mean to fall? Discouraged to the point of giving up, to walking away, to those that wanted to give up on life. He said those that were in that situation, you came alongside, and notice, we're not really doing anything, and this thing is going haywire. Does anybody have an answer on why that is? Yes, his name's the devil, the prince of the power of the air. I have perceived, I had a vision go in front of me right now. No. Notice. He says, and thou hast strengthened the feeble knees. In other words, you've been one who exhorted and came alongside those that were weak, those that were in trouble, those that could not hold up under pressure. You were the one that came alongside and lifted them up by the arm. You were the one that did these. Thy words have upholden him that is falling. I don't get it. I don't understand it. So let's try that. But now it is come upon thee. The very things that you did for these people, you are now in their situation. And thou what? What does it mean to faint? Faint means to quit because you're exhausted, you're tired, you're wore out. But he's giving up. That's what they're getting, or that's what Eliphaz got from chapter 3. Job, you're quitting. You're giving up. Notice, it toucheth thee until thou art troubled. And troubled means that you have abandoned it, that you are done. You've, again, given up. He says, the very things that touch these people now touch you, and you're crumbling. Is not this thy fear, thy confidence, thy hope, and the uprightness of thy ways? In other words, those that were quitting, those that were falling, you came alongside and helped them. Now that it's touched you, you're given up. He says that's not how you've done this. That's not the way you are going. I would say, man, that's pretty encouraging, wouldn't you say? He's reminding him of who Job was and what Job has done. I mean, that's pretty encouraging. Look at verse 7. Because he says to him, remember. Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished. What's the next words? What does that mean? Tell me, what does it mean, being innocent? Didn't do any wrong. What'd you say, brother? Not guilty. So what's he saying to Job? Job, you've done something wrong. You sinned somewhere, Job. Because whoever went through what you did and went through this process of perishing, that God wasn't judging. Because doesn't God judge sin? Doesn't God chasten those who are in sin?
Well, even the disciples, I think, asked Christ about that with the blind man.
John 9.
Yeah, who sinned, his mother or his father?
Yeah. This man or his parents? And what did Jesus say? Neither. It was for God's glory. So, yes, even back then with the disciples, thousands of years removed from Job, and what are they still thinking? God does this to sinners, and God does this for his children. I want to ask, how many of you still think that? I mean, there are times I think all of us think that, because we cry out to God, won't you bless? Won't you? Why are you not? And what are we doing? We have Eliphaz's mindset. We have the disciples' mindset. He says in verse 7 again, or where were the righteous cut off? And some would say what David said, I have never seen the righteous forsaking or a seed begging bread. Now the question is he right with the last two words he uses in that question? What are the last two words he uses? Cut off. Is Job cut off? No. The story's not over. Now question, do you think Job thinks that? Do you think the story's over? I want to die. There's no more point to me. And Eliphaz comes along and says, Job, you've done this. But you've got to admit, Job, there's something wrong because this is not how God does things. Would that make you question? If you were going through what Job did, would you question your own spirituality? And then Eliphaz now comes and asks you the question that of this reality that who has this ever happened to that was not in sin? And Job, in his distorted view at this point, says this, I can't answer that. All I know is, and he's going to say this, that I'm not in sin. I didn't do anything wrong. And the other guys are going to get frustrated and said, yeah, tell me another one, Job. Verse number 8, even as I have seen. Where's the clue there? He's getting it from his experience. They that plow iniquity and sow wickedness, what do they reap? Isn't there a truth to that? Doesn't Galatians say this? If we sow to our flesh, we shall of the flesh reap corruption. If we sow to the Spirit, we will reap life everlasting. So isn't there truth in that? But is it always true that if you sow to the Spirit, you won't ever face calamity and destruction and hurt? No. That's where that starts breaking down. It comes down to, well, what are you looking at as blessing, as cursing, as that which is judgment of God upon you for sin? And again, that idea can be, I would say this, filtered through wrong thinking. Even though you're using Galatians 6, but you're filtering it through God blesses all the time. But blessing means he's going to provide for me financially. He's going to take care of my car. He's going to take care of this. He's going to do this. And it's always good. And the reality is the blessing of God in Paul's life in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 7 through 10, was what was it? What was the blessing of God in his life on the negative side? It was grace that sustained him. It was the messenger of Satan to do what to him? To pet him and make him feel better? No. So here's what I don't call it, Paul went through the buffet when he got buffeted. So it said the messenger of Satan to buffet me. And if you look at what he says, he buffeted him, beat him down in 5 different ways in 7 through 10. And the reality is this, is it literally was a buffet. It was a smorgasbord of whacking. Question, was that the blessing of God in his life? Do you know what the consequence was if Paul didn't go through that? He couldn't have been used by God the way he was. Why? Because he says this, Paul, you would be lifted up in pride. And here's what Paul could have said. No, I won't. I won't do that. I'm the most humble man in the world. And the reality was this. Did Paul know better than God? And the answer is no. So Paul says this, I need this. So the blessing and the hedge of protection around me was the messenger of Satan to buffet me, inflict me, persecute me, cause me to have necessities. All of that because the strength of God, his power, and his grace, I learned was all sufficient. And you can't learn it any other way. I don't know. It's me. So, I'm done with that for now. We'll continue into Eliphaz's discussion. Any question in the next minute? Any questions on Eliphaz?